Hello, hello. Good evening, good evening. My name's Grant. I'm a fifth grade teacher at Think Academy. And at Think Academy, we strive to offer the classes that parents desire. And that also goes hand in hand with our webinars. So we have been hearing a lot of requests about fourth and fifth grade parents wanting to be ready for middle school math and what they can expect for their oldest children going into middle school. So I know we do have a couple videos up on our page, additionally about middle school or about like the local middle school in the area and pros and cons of each. So if that's what you're interested in, definitely go check those out. But tonight we're going to be talking about what you can expect and how you can help your kids best be prepared for middle school math. And we're mainly going to be focusing on the Common Core curriculum, which is used by all California public schools. So I know middle school is a little bit of a generic term, and I just wanted to tell you for tonight, we'll be defining middle school as between 6th to 8th grade. So 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math is what we'll be talking about tonight. Awesome. So first, as I mentioned before, there's kind of two different curriculum or general curriculum used. And so at public schools, we have what's called the Common Core curriculum. And at private schools, they each use their own variation of, or their independent curricula that's adopted by each private school. And we'll just call that just top private schools curriculum. So we've kind of looked at a bunch of the top ones in the area and kind of got an idea, and we'll be using that for that tonight. And so the Common Core curriculum for math, it's what this means is it's a curriculum adopted by all public schools in over 40 states for grades K to 12. And it's just their educational standards. So for each grade, they have a breakdown of what each student should know at the end of that grade for both mathematics and English classes. In general, the Common Core curriculum, which we'll get into details of tonight, is much slower paced compared to top private schools curriculum. It averages for math about 3 years behind. So this top private school curriculum is much faster paced, and that's because they're independent curricula and they can kind of change it a little bit faster or easier than the Common Core can change. An example of this would be how if you take a fast track student in public school under the Common Core curriculum, they won't see Algebra 1 until the 8th grade. Now, if you look at a fast track student in private school, they will cover Algebra 1 in 6th grade. And so you can see just right off the bat, even the fastest track students are 2 years behind top private schools' fastest track students. And as I mentioned before, the Common Core curriculum is used by all California public schools. So if you're considering sending your kid to a public school anywhere in California, this will definitely be relevant for you. So we're just going to go through grade by grade and kind of see what the Common Core covers and what makes it slower paced than the top private schools curriculum. So first we have 6th grade, and these are kind of the topics covered in 6th grade. Now, the Common Core does a little bit of a unique way of breaking down the topics in math, and it covers a little bit of each of these 4 modules each year of middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Whereas top private schools generally take a more direct way, and they cover one topic in whole, or one module or subject in whole, each year of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. For example, the top private schools do Algebra 1 in 6th grade, as I mentioned, then Geometry in 7th grade, and then Algebra 2/Trigonometry in 8th grade. Instead here, we see that the Common Core does a little bit of each one, each grade, going from 6th, 7th to 8th. So it's a little unique, but you can see you have to be prepared for this wide variety of topics covered under the Common Core between numbers and operations, algebra, geometry, and then statistics and probability. So the biggest difference here, going from 5th grade into 6th grade under the Common Core, is the introduction to algebra. So I know it was a shock to me when I started seeing letters on the board in my math class. And so I know definitely a recommendation to prepare for that is make sure your students or your kids are working on or getting introduced to the concepts of algebra and like what's a variable, what does a, y, and x have to do with math before they reach 6th grade, so that they'll be very prepared once they start seeing it on the board. So we're going to take now a second to look directly at kind of an average question from the Common Core and an average question from a top private school in 6th grade. So as you can see, for the Common Core 6th grade question, it's very just a very kind of general introduction, beginner algebra question, where you just have a very simple equation and they're asked to solve for x. So this is kind of what you can expect from, or the extent of algebra that you'd see in 6th grade under the Common Core. Now, at top private schools in the area, for 6th grade, you'll see a question more like here on the right, where you have a very, relatively very complex, using linear equations, radicals to the 3rd degree, and inequalities, and then combined into graphing those, or that linear equation, and choosing which graph would best represent that function. So this is definitely a question that you wouldn't see in the Common Core until 8th or even 9th grade. So you can already see how the top private schools right off the bat in middle school are 2 to 3 years ahead of the Common Core, specifically in regards to algebra. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So moving along, we're going to now talk about some ways you can prepare your student for learning under the Common Core in 6th grade. So the very biggest thing that I recommend to students, the best way they can be prepared is just being resilient and having that perseverance when they're faced with a tough problem or a challenge. It's extremely important that you develop these skills early on so that they don't see these harder problems in 6th grade and see these harder algebra problems and kind of give up and start getting lost, and that will just kind of snowball through middle school and into high school, and that's definitely not what we want. So a great way to do this is when you're practicing with your kids in elementary school, make sure to, when they're stuck on a problem, don't give them the answer right away. Say to them rather, okay, well, if you can't solve it that way, how about looking at it this way? Or is there another way you can look at or approach the problem to give you a different view of it or a different perspective to give you a better chance at solving the problem? Over time, that habit will kind of help them build this resiliency that will be very necessary once they hit middle school. Furthermore, as I mentioned earlier, just a familiarity with algebra will be extremely beneficial to them. So not being shocked when they start seeing letters on the board in their math class, that alone will definitely help them feel ahead or actually be ahead in their 6th grade math classes under the Common Core. And so just introducing them, okay, what's a variable? Well, here's some basic algebra problems in 4th or 5th grade, and just kind of present those to them and help them really familiarize themselves with the principles of algebra early on. Lastly, something you can do to always be prepared for any math class is really building a strong foundation in numbers and operations and number theory. So numbers and operations, you're going to want to run some times tables, make sure they understand their long division, maybe division tables, make sure they're quick, fast, and efficient with all of those different operations that they'll have to do and know how to do. And then number theory, make sure they understand the different properties of a number. Okay, what's an odd number, what's an even number, what's a prime number. So if they're very familiar and have this really strong foundation in these two categories, it will definitely set them up for success both in 6th grade and beyond. Alright, so next up we have the topics covered in 7th grade. And as you can see here, it's the same exact 4 modules they saw in 6th grade. Numbers and operations, algebra, geometry, statistics, and probability. However, it just builds a little bit on each of those modules into 7th grade. And a lot of this that I've highlighted in red here are actually just repeats of what they learned in 6th grade and are taught again under Common Core in 7th grade. For example, they'll teach, so you learn algebraic expressions and equations in 6th grade, but in 7th grade, it's just like a small spin on it. You have algebraic expressions and equations, word problems. So I don't think this would be the most efficient way or effective way to teach these topics, because teachers will spend a lot of their time, even the entire fall quarter or fall semester, relearning and reteaching everything from 6th grade, then to expand on those topics in the second half of 7th grade. And this is just very not efficient and becomes redundant and can be a real challenge for those high achieving students that are just bored or not challenged, and they can fall behind just because they get bored during class seeing the same topics they learned the year before. And then another thing I want to highlight here is that geometric figures and angles aren't even seen for the first time under Common Core until we hit 7th grade here. So that's definitely something that stands out because it's very fundamental geometry, and the Common Core doesn't talk about it until 7th grade. However, on the bright side, this shows us how middle school math has a lot of wiggle room and extra time that you will be able to, your students will either fall behind or you'll be able to give them extra materials to help them keep pace with those top private schools. So if you stick with just the Common Core, the students will definitely not be set up for success at the high school level. They definitely need some supplemental material or supplemental challenges in these topics to be able to keep pace with those top private schools. So some tips to prepare for 7th grade. First and foremost, as I mentioned, would be a familiarity with geometric shapes. So they definitely want to understand all of those basic shapes, and then also more complicated shapes. Like, instead of just understanding the difference between a square and a rectangle, you want to introduce to them rhombus, quadrilateral, and getting into more particular or specific shapes in geometry, and then learning the properties of their angles, all the formulas associated with those. And so if they can learn the volume of formula, the area formula, if they can learn those ahead of time, they will be very much so set up for success in 7th grade math under the Common Core. You would definitely also, a tricky topic introduced in 7th grade under the Common Core would be probability and statistics. So learning these probability questions can be challenging for a lot of 7th graders. So something you can do with them is just introduce what is probability? What does it mean to ask, oh, what are the chances of this happening? Or what's the odds that this happens? What exactly does that mean? And them understanding that before 7th grade will help them greatly when they start seeing these problems in their 7th grade math classes. Now, a great way to do that would be use a visual example, such as, oh, if I flip this coin, what are the odds that I get heads? What if I flip the coin 2 times in a row? What's the odds that it's heads twice in a row? That will definitely help them and help them visualize what probability is and familiarize themselves with the topic before they get to 7th grade. And then lastly, as I mentioned, 7th grade math under the Common Core is very similar to 6th grade math under the Common Core. So taking a similar approach to prepare will be very successful, in that building that same strong foundation will be very, very helpful to them come 7th grade. So again, working on their numbers and operations and number theory, and just being really quick with those times tables will help them greatly come 7th grade. So next, we've been talking a lot about how these two curriculum prepare, or lack thereof, students for college and high school. And so we're going to look at an example of an SAT question pulled directly from the SAT website. And as you can see, it says, Michelle is randomly drawing cards from a deck of 52 cards. What is the chance she will draw a black queen followed by a 5 of any color without replacing the cards? So as you can see, this is a very basic probability question. Now, based on what we've seen so far, we would know that an elementary grade student, maybe a fourth grader or a fifth grader, at a top private school would have already seen probability and would probably be able to solve this question. Whereas under the Common Core, a public school student wouldn't see this material for the first time until 7th grade. So already they're 2 or 3 years behind their direct preparation for college entrance exams. So you can kind of see how that would snowball, and they're just really not on track to be successful on these college entrance exams just right from the get-go in middle school. So it definitely requires some supplemental material to back up that Common Core. Lastly, we're going to talk about the topics covered in 8th grade. So again, here we have numbers and operations, algebra, functions, geometry, and then statistics and probability. So it's the same 4 modules that were covered in 6th and 7th grade, but in addition this year we have functions. And again, they're just, each year the Common Core builds on the same material in each category that was learned the year previously. But again, it's so inefficient because we have, I've highlighted again in red, all the topics that were covered in 7th grade and or in 6th grade, and that are covered again under 8th grade curriculum. And you can see the top one here, inequalities, was actually covered under both 7th grade and 6th grade curriculum, and is actually then covered again in 8th grade. So this kind of highlights the way the Common Core teaches inequalities is extremely inefficient. You see straight from, you learn inequalities in 6th grade, and then you go 12 months without seeing it, and then you learn a little bit more about inequalities in 7th grade, and then you go maybe 14 months without seeing it again, and you learn the last bit about inequalities. I know as a middle schooler that's extremely challenging to be able to recall information from over a year ago and then build on it right away. It's going to require a lot of the teachers to have to reteach what was taught about inequalities in 6th and 7th grade. So you end up learning about inequalities 3 different times, and it just highlights a microcosm of the issues with the Common Core and how they break up math learning specifically in middle school. It is just a real issue. And it's extremely ineffective for students to be learning like that. However, we do see a new module in 8th grade, which is functions, but as I showed you earlier, students would actually see functions under the top private schools curriculum in 6th grade. So already they're 2 years behind seeing functions for the first time. And then they would also see the congruence of geometrical shapes and the Pythagorean theorem in 8th grade. These are topics that are learned in 7th grade under the Common Core curriculum, if not earlier than that. And again, you learn volume again in 8th grade, which you had already covered in both 6th and 7th grade. So it just really highlights how slow and redundant the Common Core has become. Lastly, we have the tips to prepare for 8th grade math learning. And the biggest thing to prepare for 8th grade math learning under the Common Core is you want to have developed and really nailed down the mechanics of solving an equation in 6th and 7th grade. So if you don't have that down in 6th and 7th grade, you're definitely going to struggle when you start to face these more challenging problems and equations in 8th grade. So you want to be able to understand how to manipulate an equation and kind of the steps involved in that, so that when you start seeing radicals and exponents in 8th grade math within your equation, you'll be more prepared and more ready to solve those problems. Furthermore, we have definitely important to have a familiarity with word problems and visualizations in 8th grade. This is something that can be extremely difficult for students that aren't necessarily visual learners. So you want to help them practice going from reading that block of words and translating that into a system of numbers and shapes. So that's something that can be extremely challenging for students, but often you'll see on the hardest question on the SAT or the hardest question on the ACT are going to be word problems, or even the AMC8 that these 8th graders will be taking. The hardest questions will be word problems that they have to translate to go from a word problem and translate it into an equation. So that's definitely a skill that takes practice to develop for sure. So a great way to do this is in 6th, 7th grade, or even in elementary school. Help your students and your children by showing them word problems early on. They don't have to be algebraic word problems or geometry word problems. Just have them be working with word problems, become familiar with reading words, visualizing it in their head, and then translating into numbers and shapes on their paper. Going through those mechanics and building those skills early on, practicing them a lot, will definitely help them come 8th grade. You don't want them to become a student who sees a word problem and gets worried or nervous. That's not what you want. You want them to be excited when they see a word problem and be really enjoy that problem solving that comes along with word problems. And then lastly, for 8th grade, they'll take a pretty significant step up in their geometry learning in 8th grade. So you want them to have that real strong foundation in geometry. So they need to know all of their common shapes, and even those more complex or specific shapes that we talked about earlier. They need to be familiar with all of those and the principles of each. So they need to know the area and volume formulas of all of those shapes, and just really have that real strong foundation in geometry so that they can build on that when they start learning the Pythagorean theorem and all the more complicated geometry learning they'll see in 8th grade. So we're going to do another example now. This is another SAT question that I've pulled from the SAT website directly. And this one is one of the harder questions on the SAT math section from a couple years ago. And as you can see, it's a linear algebra, a linear equation problem involving both the graphs and a three variable equation. So, as we showed earlier, a top 6th grader at a top private school would have already seen a problem very similar to this, and in 6th grade would already have all the tools necessary to solve a problem like this on the SAT, a more challenging problem on the SAT. They would already be ready to solve, or be beginning that track of being ready to solve come time in high school when they have to take the SAT. However, under Common Core, a student won't see linear equations until 8th grade. And considering that's just a general introduction to linear equations, and this is a pretty challenging problem that requires knowledge of linear equations in addition to being able to solve this word problem and combine it with all these different graphs, a student under the Common Core might not be able to solve this problem until even 9th grade. So, as you can see here, directly in the terms of preparing for those college entrance exams, you can see this example of how the Common Core is already 2 or 3 years even behind top private school curriculum. So that's definitely something to think about and consider. If your student is entering into middle school under the Common Core, you definitely want to be knowledgeable about what they need to know and how they can stay on track with those top private schools. So, to everything we've talked about tonight, overall we talked about how the California Common Core curriculum, it's just too slow, extremely redundant and repetitive, and honestly, looking at the top private school curriculums of today, it's definitely outdated and in need of a pretty vast overhaul and restructuring for sure. A lot of this stems from the issue of how they organize the topics. Learning a little bit of 5 different subjects each year and then building on that is just ineffective and ends up being a lot of wasted time and not the best way to go about it. So you end up wasting too much time allocated for review. Teachers spend half the year reviewing, and then the students are still behind, and then they only get the last 6 months to learn all the material they were supposed to have the whole year to learn. And so they end up wasting a lot of their time. And looking at it tonight, you can kind of see how, and the top private schools curriculums do it. They take this 3 years of material according to the Common Core, and they cover it in 1 year with quality teaching. So we definitely think that this 3 years could be covered in just 1 year with the right teaching. And that's how the top private schools get onto high school math in 7th and 8th grade, is by covering all of the Common Core middle school math in Algebra 1 class in 6th grade. Now, we totally understand that not all students will have the opportunity to attend a top private school. So our recommendation would be, if you choose to enroll in a public school, we definitely recommend enrolling in those fast track classes. So they'll at least keep you within a year of the top private schools' average students. So you won't be too far, or you'll definitely start closing that gap just from their school learning. And often those classes, those fast track classes, are called GATE, but you can do a little bit of research and look around at the schools in your area and what kind of fast track or GATE classes they offer for math specifically. And so all of this leads us to the conclusion that without additional material, the Common Core curriculum honestly does not set students up for success. They will not be on track to be ready for AP high school math, and they won't be on track to score 5s on both of those calculus AP exams in high school. And then, as we showed you today, they already are not on track in their preparation for the SAT questions in regards to math. And then not only this in high school and college entrance exams, but once they reach the college level, they'll be 2 or 3 years behind their colleagues at that are coming from top private schools. So you definitely want to help them bridge this gap. So I bet a lot of you are wondering how we recommend you can bridge the gap. And so we would recommend breaking it up like this. Very similar to how top private schools do it. In 6th grade, you really want to focus your efforts at home with your students on Algebra 1. So get Algebra 1, really get a really solid grip on Algebra 1 in 6th grade, while they're in 6th grade at home. And then in 7th grade, you want to really focus their efforts on geometry. So get that really, really strong foundation in geometry, so that then in 8th grade, you can kind of combine these two topics into Algebra 2/trigonometry in 8th grade. And this will keep you right on par. So a combination of this breakup and enrolling in fast track classes at their public school, where they'll still have the Common Core, but they'll have a faster version of it. So it'll definitely be really helpful in combination with this. They'll definitely be able to stay on track with those top private schools. So how you can do that, we really like the Art of Problem Solving workbooks. I have a link to their right here. And they have a great book for introducing students to algebra in 6th grade, and then geometry in 7th grade, and then kind of intermediate algebra or Algebra 2 in 8th grade. So I definitely would recommend checking these out. And yeah, we totally understand that not all students can have that opportunity to attend private schools. But these are just some recommended resources we have to help supplement the Common Core and stay on track with those top private schools. So if you want to take a second now to screenshot this, feel free to. I'd highly recommend that if you intend, or your children are going to be attending public school, and they're going to be having the Common Core coming up. I would definitely recommend supplementing it with this. And but if you have any questions about your specific scenario, please feel free to reach out to us for help. We can always offer advice in math and middle school math. And so yeah, for all those questions, and if you'd like any follow-up information, you can add me on WeChat. My QR code's right here, and I'll get back to you right away. Or if you want some free math resources, we actually have coming up in October, we're doing a spooky season challenge with each weekday of October, we'll be posting a previous AMC8 question of the day, but it'll be spun and kind of have a Halloween theme to it. So hopefully your kids will have fun with it, and they'll prepare for the AMC8, which is coming up in just about 40 days. So it was a pleasure. I'll stick around in the chat box for a little bit if you have any questions. But thank you very much, and have a good night.